Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pearls of Wisdom, Aquarian Pearls. And today I'm very honored to be with Jan Logan, who's one of Australia's most famous premier designers, who's worked a lot with pearls and other jewels. So welcome, Jan. So good to be with you.
It's a pleasure to be here, David. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And Jan, can I start off asking you where you grew up, where you studied, and then how did you come to be in the jewellery business?
Okay, well, I was born and raised on a farm outside Narrabri, northwest New South Wales. And my father grew wheat and raised cattle and sheep, and the wool industry was a big part of his life. And so I was the third of four children, but I was sort of isolated in terms of my brother and sister were 5 and 7 years older, and my younger brother came 7 years later. So I was alone a lot and sort of isolated, lived out of town. And so I lived in my imagination and dressed up myself, dolls, anything I could get my hands on. And my brother, when he was old enough, my little brother, 7 years later. And so it was sort of evident early on, my interest in adornment. It was just there in me. So it just took a long time for it to eventuate and work itself out. It was a pretty strong push, actually.
Were you homeschooled, or did you go away, or did you go to the school?
No, I wasn't homeschooled. They didn't believe in buses in those days, and so I had to board in Narrabri with relatives.
Yes.
Of my father's, and I went to a convent school in Narrabri until 6th class, and then I was sent off to boarding school in Sydney.
Yes.
For a further 4 or 5 years, and so I was schooled in that manner.
Yes. Oh, right. And how did you come to be in the jewelry business?
Well, it's a sort of longish story, but I was married when I was 20, so I had a fairly early start in that thing.
Yes.
Married, and I had 3 sons, and I looked after my husband and brought up my boys. And then when Angus went to boarding school in Sydney, he was the youngest, I had this latent desire to do something with myself or for myself. And I answered an advertisement in the Narrabri Northwestern Courier for a promotions officer with the Chamber of Commerce. And my job was to build up the chamber and membership. And I actually did it very successfully, and to where I had the biggest membership in the state of New South Wales. But the point of this is that the president of the chamber was the town's main jeweler. And I was in his office all the time, playing with tools on the desk and giving him ideas and suggesting this and that. And he eventually offered me a partnership of 20%, a shareholding. So of course I whipped out and got a personal loan, and that was my serendipitous start into the industry.
Yes.
And I learned a lot during those days in working in this jewelry shop. And there was one jeweler on staff, and I designed my first 3-stone diamond ring for the little finger, a bezel setting in yellow gold, and that was a hit. So I just had a nice little taste of what it could be like to do my thing.
Yes.
Continue on. And during this time, I was traveling quite a lot overseas with my husband, John, who was on a grain marketing board.
Yes.
For sorghum and wheat and so on. And so I had the opportunity to see the world. I was very, very lucky. And through that, I traveled to the east and all over Europe. And I was able to just hone my eye on beautiful jewelry.
Yes.
And I loved that. Is that coming through? No.
Yes, I'm good.
And so I learned a lot during that, and I was lucky to have that experience. And so when I was in London, I started buying antique jewelry.
Yes.
And coming home and through the east, I'd buy pearls and stones.
Yes.
So this allowed me to start building up a little private business of my own, where I would sell privately through exhibitions and sales.
Yes.
And I started in the Moree Women's Club, which was a beautiful building. And I set all the tables up with white tablecloths that I was importing myself anyway, all embroidered, and set it up. And no one else was doing that in these days. And I actually did very, very well. And I traveled all over New South Wales and Queensland with one person, a little money tin, and my car, and no insurance, just did my thing. And I was actually did very well and formed the nucleus of a mailing system that I did it all by hand. There's nothing digital then.
Fantastic.
And all the money we took was cash or check. There weren't any credit cards either.
Yeah.
So back in different days, but they gave me a nest egg of money and jewelry collection, so that we eventually sold a big property in the country in Narrabri with my husband.
Yes.
And we moved to the eastern suburbs. And I was fairly familiar with this area and lived in the eastern suburbs in Point Piper, because I had been in my earlier days after boarding school. I went to Miss Hale's Business College, which my mother and father thought that was a good idea.
Yes.
And did shorthand and typing and learned to hold a handbag and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the beauty of this was I lived in Darling Point in a hostel, and I got a lot of my inspiration back in those days because you talk about inspiration, from a beautiful little shops in Rose Street. You probably don't even know about it. And it was between Pitt and Castlereagh, and joined onto the corner of the Australia Hotel. And it was very narrow, easy to walk from side to side, full of the most beautiful little boutiques filled with treasures. And so again, my eye was very honed on that. And I did learn a lot from how to display and what to do.
Yes.
So so that sort of stood me in good stead. And so after we moved to the eastern suburbs, I again saw another advertisement in the Wentworth Courier for this shop in the Royal Arcade, a small shop, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And I timed it to coincide with a window dressing competition, and we had a racing theme. So I took this small shop, I made it look very pretty. I had a wonderful young woman called Louise Heron as my assistant, and she took me on faith, and we started this business in October 1989.
In Double Bay, in the Royal
Double Bay, in the Royal Arcade, just off New South Head Road.
Yes.
And we did the window in a racing theme, and we actually won second prize.
Fantastic.
And Maria Findlay won first prize over here on the corner of Bay and Cross Streets with moving jockeys in the window. But people would come over and stare at this window, and sort of the judges, and I heard one woman say, "Who is this little girl?" And I heard a response say, "Oh, she's some person from Narrabri. She'll last about 3 weeks." So,
Fantastic.
you know.
And you're absolutely still here and
Absolutely still
flourishing.
here with bells on. And that shop, I was only in there for a year. It was successful. People liked us because we started getting some press, you see, from this window dressing competition, and ended up in the Sunday Telegraph. And so the press started coming in, and so did the customers. And so after a year, I knew that I'd be better off on a street front. So I moved over here exactly 1 year later, to the same month, to 36 Cross Street, where we still are.
Fantastic.
So
and
that was my serendipitous start.
yes.
I was sort of lucky too. But
Yes.
people liked what I did, what we offered.
Yes.
And I did get a lot of inspiration from my time in London. I saw the shops there, and I loved what they were doing, and so it did inspire me too.
And you've always worked a lot with pearls, haven't you, Jan? They've been
Yes.
a great love of yours.
Yes, yes. We have always used pearls for sure. And, you know, I think we helped contemporize the pearl
Yes. Yes, there was.
design.
Yes, back in 1989, when you were starting off in your retail, there was a lot of sales of just round necklaces, but you've used a lot of Baroque pearls and all different shapes, and made them much more. You kind of led the fashion in making them much more fashionable and for a younger audience. And you've also been well known for picking the latest it girl before she became.
Yes. Well, Angus has a hand in that. But with the South Sea pearls, I won a bronze award with the South Sea Pearl Consortium. I don't know if you remember them.
Oh yes, that was once upon a time my job with the marketing back then in the Past Bailey days back in.
Well, in 1997, I won an award.
Yes.
For some earrings I designed, and for directional design, they called it.
Yes.
That helped me feel confident about what we were doing. And so we were using leather and different colored stones, semi-precious, precious, and loved doing it. Still do.
Yes. Yes.
You know, we designed one collection called the Rock and Pearl collection, where I'd been to India and got several different stones and used South Sea pearls with them. And that was very successful too.
Yes, fantastic.
Yes.
I know, and have met plenty of women who have Jan Logan pearls and Jan Logan jewellery.
Oh, and that's very nice to hear, David.
They absolutely adore it. And Jan, you expanded. Business was good, and so you know, we used to meet in Hong Kong at the trade fair.
We did.
I remember, and you had a wonderful store. You have a wonderful store in Melbourne as well, and Perth. And do you have one in Brisbane as well?
Yes, we do.
So you're Melbourne, Perth, and Brisbane.
Well, not Perth anymore, but we have Brisbane and Melbourne. And
yes.
Angus came and joined the business in 1997 from London, where he'd been working there.
Yes.
And he'd been influenced by other brands there, and you could see that this small business had a lot of movement in it. So he was responsible for a lot of the expansion.
Yes.
And we moved up to Hong Kong during the SARS epidemic.
Yes.
And we were only one of a handful of people staying in the Ritz-Carlton at the time. It was basically empty. And we had to wear masks.
Yes. It was a precursor to now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In concessions we had there with Cebu, and then we moved into Lane Crawford. And then we developed into our own store in the International Finance Centre. You'd remember that.
Yes, the IFC, yes.
And
on Queens Road Central.
It was successful, yes, it was very successful. And they started, Apple came in the digital world, and Apple started to want space, more space and bigger space. And they actually kept reducing lots of shops' size so that they could fit Apple in. There'd be floors of it. So we ended up living there.
Yeah.
And closing, but it turned into a good thing because we wouldn't want to be there now.
No. You've had a very good hand of fate in some ways, that you left a place when it was right and started where else. Yes.
We left
and who has,
of it all.
Jan, can I ask you who has inspired you along the way? Have you had some very iconic, inspiring people in your life? Or have you self-developed everything?
Well, my mother and father both inspired me just because they loved to dress well and did, and would go to town twice a week, all dressed to the nines. My father in his three-piece suit, and they go to balls and look terribly glamorous, gorgeous, and I was very absorbed with all of that. But whilst I was living in Narrabri, I was best friends with this girl called Diane McCarran, and her mother, Bobby, was running the tourist hotel, and I used to go and stay there a lot, and she inspired me a lot, actually. She was very glamorous. She traveled overseas, which, you know, was a bit rare back then.
Yes.
Come down the stairs every night, dressed for dinners superbly, and wore beautiful jewelry. And, you know, she had a man in a tuxedo playing the piano in the dining room, and a little courtyard with waiters serving coffee. in their dinner suits. And this was unusual for Narrabri way back then. It
So
was
stylish.
mellow even. It was just glamorous. So she inspired me, and along with the shops in Rose Street and things,
Yes.
they were my biggest sources of inspiration.
And wonderful to be able to dress up in that way. I remember when I was a kid, my dad came back from a visit to Broome in West Australia buying some natural pearls. And when we grew up in Wimbledon near the tennis in London, and he was telling me about Alf Morgan, who was a pearl farmer, and he invited him for dinner, but he said, you have to bring a tuxedo, you've got to wear a black tie. And he dressed formally, even in all the heat and everything. But it's good. It keeps a sense of occasion and of being and glamour. It's good, isn't it?
Glamour too, and wearing nice things and jewellery, and men looking handsome in their tuxedos or dinner suits.
And I always tell customers and people who ask, I always say, wear your pearls, wear your jewellery if you love them, wear them all the time and every day.
Yes.
You do need to dress up and put them on, but there's something about pearls and jewellery that so enhances a human being. People feel more regal and majestic, don't they?
They do, and they feel more glamorous in it, and
definitely the way. And Jan, could I ask you a last question, which is, if you had somebody, a young person contemplating coming into the jewellery business, what advice would you give them, or would you steer them in a certain direction?
Well, I would definitely advise them to follow their instincts and their dreams. And, you know, I'd advise them to be persistent, determined,
yes, and
polite, to stay true to yourself, and just not to give up. Just keep going.
Fantastic. That's excellent advice.
Yes.
Well, Jan, thank you so much for being in our interview today. It's great honor to be with you, and you're like a real shining light in our industry. So thank you so much.
Well, I just want to say one thing. I started the business in Double Bay when I was 50, and the message is it's never too late. So that's what I'd say to the young people that are interested, or anybody, any age.
That's a fabulous message. Oh, thank you so much, Jan.
Thank you, David.